Welcome to Repum Group's Item 24, where we take you a step beyond the standard FDD. We asked ourselves, why stop at 23 items when some of the most important insights live beyond the page? Here we're breaking down the inner workings of franchising and sharing real-life strategies and stories that drive the industry forward.
Welcome to another episode of Item 24. Today we're going to be discussing what makes up a successful franchisor. One of the first, items or things that make a successful franchisor, it's always got to start with who is running the business, right? Oftentimes when we see emerging brands, it's a combination of founders and or leadership team, but they really have to have the messaging down, and obviously they have to have a successful business. So foundation has to be there, whether they have 2 locations, 10 locations, 5 locations, whatever it may be. You have to look at the foundation of the economics of the brand. Ultimately, it has to make money and the economics have to make sense. The best case scenario is they've also proven it out, not only in maybe an urban setting, but also proven out in a suburban setting. And sometimes they've even been able to do it in a regional manner, not just in one town. When those things are in place, now you have a solid foundation. And you really start from the ground and you start to build what becomes the franchisor. And what you're trying to do at that level, when you've committed to being a franchisor, when you're in the emerging brand state of your business, you have to think in a big way, which is, how am I going to make this a national brand? And not just how, but what's the tactical parts that have to be in place in order to make that successful for franchisees? Because most emerging franchisors and businesses have done it on, again, a local level, maybe a regional level. And now they got to figure out crossing state borders, different time zones, different segments of markets, Midwest versus East Coast versus West Coast. And there's different buyers, right, in these markets, and they have different buying habits. And so you have to start to adjust and learn, how is that going to work and how is it replicatable in all of those markets? So once you've made the decision to become a national franchisor and go from either local regional business to a national business, before you make that final leap, do you have the capital in order to do it? Because oxygen in your business is capital early on. Oftentimes a misconception with emerging franchisors is they don't need a certain amount of capital to grow because they don't think that it's going to take 3+ years to be royalty sufficient. So let me walk you through why. So let's say an emerging brand decides to franchise today, and now they're going to go on a national level. It's very hard to predict how many franchisors, first and foremost, you're going to bring into the system in year 1, year 2, and year 3. You can start to put together, projections and so on, but what you absolutely need to do is make sure you have capital on hand, because 2 things you have to do as franchise fees roll in. Obviously, that'll be some of your working capital, but you are not royalty sufficient right out of the gate. As you start opening locations, if you're a brick and mortar business, it takes up to a year, maybe even longer sometimes, for your franchisees to actually open their doors. So think about it. You open your first location a year after you sold the first location, and that means no royalties, no revenue has been produced for the franchisor because there's no sales from that business until it opens its doors. If you're a home service-based brand and you're not brick and mortar, you do open quicker, usually 90 days, maybe 120 days after they sign the franchise agreement, but there's still a gap. And so you got to make sure you have the ability to raise capital, or you have your own capital on the sideline in order to use as you're growing your business in the first 2 to 3 years as a franchisor. So once you've actually raised the capital, or you have your own capital to grow your national franchise brand, the next phase and part of the capital you'll use is to hire the right people on your corporate team. One of the other things you want to do before you hire the people is really zone in on what your culture is going to be. I always talk about culture is everything in a business, in my opinion. And if you don't have that nailed down and people aren't rowing in the same direction of which your vision is, oftentimes it's going to fall flat. And not only will it fall flat on a corporate level, but keep in mind, you now have franchisees that are following your vision. And so that culture and that vision and that path of which you're going down as a franchisor better be super clear, because franchisees want to execute on it. They don't want to figure it out on their own. Otherwise, they would have gone into business on their own. So once you've done that, now you got to look at who you're hiring, right? So let's say you need to hire a director of marketing, and let's say you need to hire a VP of operations, or someone maybe director of operations. Those individuals, what I've seen work best in who you hire is people that have franchising experience, specifically who have worked with other franchisors. I often see emerging brands hire people they know locally. While they are great employees, most of them don't have franchising experience. And guess what? It falls flat. And the only reason it falls flat is because they don't know how to work with franchisees yet. You need to understand that a big part of being a franchisor is a little bit being a therapist. And the reason it is because they're going through a lot as an early adopter of your brand. They are going to learn with you, but they ultimately need the support with someone who's opened maybe 50 locations in another brand before or more. That's going to go so far for you because you have the brand, you have the understanding of the model and why it works. But what you don't have typically as an emerging franchisor is really how to be a sophisticated franchisor. And the more talent you get underneath you in that process early on, the better off you're going to be when you get to 50 or 100 locations open.